Last episode, we began the process of cutting out, assembling and gluing the components of our boat together. There has been a bit of a lapse in these episodes because a few other things came up. We got ourselves a new pup who needs training. One of our pigs gave birth to 9 piglets. Then the other gave birth to 8, which meant that there were some runts to care for. Some of the old fences became a little too old and needed replacing because our house cow Astrid gave us a calf and will need more space to graze. And I needed to learn how to milk a cow. There's been a lot to take in and a lot to do, but I finally got back into the shed and got a little work done. Okay, in order to save some shackles, I've been recycling as much timber as I can. So this stuff I got from a demolition site nearby. So this is a local hardwood, Jarrah. The plans call for softwood to be used for what I'm doing here, but I got this stuff for free, so I'm going to go with it. It might add a little bit of weight to the boat, but I don't think it's going to be too detrimental. So this stuff I went through, took out all the nails that were in it. That's left a few holes. That doesn't matter for us. I do need to take care of, there's a little rebate in the back here. I'm just going to take those lips off with a hand planer and then cut it down to size. There is a bit of a varnish here, but I'll easily be able to sand that off. It's only interior. It's only interior stuff. It's not very hardcore. So there you go. So at the moment, up to this stage, the only wood that I've paid for has been the plywood. The rest of it has just been consumables. All right. So I have bought a little bit of thickening agent. The epoxy was supplied to us by a viewer, as we spoke about before, but none of the timber at the moment has been bought. My neighbour Don has donated a bit of it that he didn't think he was going to use to the cause, so thanks go to him. So that is a way, if you are money poor but time rich like I am, if you can find a demolition site and go down there with your own crowbar and pull the stuff off, you can save a bit of money that way. So I'll just clean these up and then we'll get back to reinforcing these frames. So there we go, pretty much cut down. It's just a little bit over 45 at the moment. I can also cut these into 20s. This timber was, it was meant to be looked at, so it's in pretty good condition. No cracks, no knots or anything like that. So I'm actually pretty happy with this stuff. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to be under the floor of a boat, but it does want to be strong. Once this is coated with epoxy, it should last for quite some time. The only drawback of doing this is that it's not a softwood, so it will be a little bit heavier. But again, that depends on the softwood you choose. It may not be that big a deal. And of course, the nail holes, I'll have to just fill them with a little bit of epoxy bog as I go. I'm okay with that. Some of the other wood that I have for future parts of the project, like the boomkin and the bowsprit, have come from my very generous neighbour Don. This is a very nice chunk of silky oak, and we use this Alaskan mill to section it, ready to dimension later. This wood is known for its interesting grain, workability and durability. I'm very grateful to have it. Some of these frames where I've sort of filled in where the screw holes were when I was putting all this together, I've just filled that with some thickened epoxy and it is sitting a little bit proud. There's going to be more of this sort of stuff throughout the build. So what I wanted to do is just make an attachment for my router so I can just take off any high spots very, very quickly and save myself quite a bit of sanding work. I'm sure there'll be more of this down the track, so a little bit of effort now might save me some time. For all router-based jigs, the screw template comes from the router itself. Marking is done with the correct size drill bit, taking care not to damage the plastic router base. I find the bit marks a perfect centre for drilling with a drill press. A primitive way to countersink for the screw heads is to use a large bit and drill just a few millimetres in. There is always a reason to use a router in my shed, but a pencil line and saw would work just as well. Mark the centre for where the router bit will be and cut out a decent clearance hole. Make sure the hole is open wide to the front of the jig and attach the new base to the router. Okay, so that's the jig made. It took just over 10 minutes. It's not very long at all. I managed to get a nice little router bit the other day for about $5 on clearance. The good thing about this is the cutting blades are just slightly higher than the centre, and that means that it can move along and we can use it as a bottom clearing bit if you like. I'll show you how I'm going to use it on this, but I was really happy to find that. This little router, it's not a very precision unit, but you see the principle of it now. So this the cutting blade now is just like a hair short of being able to touch this surface. Plug it in. When I'm making adjustments, I always have it unplugged. So hang on, let me just plug that in. Okay, so that hasn't marred the surface after that little test. So now we'll just go and we'll find some of these holes that I've repaired and see how it goes. Okay, that looks pretty good. It's sitting a little bit proud. I don't need to go too crazy with this. This will be under the floor of the boat, but I'll be happy with that. If this was in a spot where you would be constantly looking at it and it's on display, I would go a lot further than that, but that's pretty smooth. So this will need a few more coats. This in particular, I do want to get that down a bit because there is a reinforcing bit of timber coming through here. So now I can pretty much go along with that router set like that, and all of those little screw holes that I filled, I can fix that up. Okay, so this isn't too much of a difficult frame, but I still do like to have the plans where I can easily refer to them. It is important to get the bits of wood on the right side of the frame so it all goes together nicely. That's not that big a deal. These side bits of the frame, usually the bits that are going athwartships across the boat are on the other side to those. It shows there's a dotted line showing that this is on the other side of this cross piece of this frame, this upright, and of course the other ones are solid, so they'll be on the other side. So this one's very straightforward. 5. There is a 20 by 20 on the aft face, it's dotted, and there is a note here as well. There's there's a detail to get my attention, and I do have to glue and screw this. I am just screwing these anyway in a lot of instances. I just find it's easier than going out and clamping them. It's just a pre-drill, just run a few screws in, 304 stainless screws, and then I'll cover the screw heads later. It just adds a little bit of strength anyway, so it's no big deal for me to do that. Alright, we'll go ahead and do that. You can also see that there is some gaps in those cross pieces of timber where stringers will go through later on. I don't bother cutting them out of the bit of wood. I'll just stick the wood straight on there, and then I'll handle that later with my flush trimming bit on the router. A way to cut down on mistakes and work quickly is to avoid repeated measuring to mark centres and placement lines. I like to use vernier calipers as a marking gauge. The screw hole's location isn't critical, but I do want them reasonably evenly spaced to share the load and clamp the glue up effectively. String lines are one of the oldest ways to get an absolutely straight line with minimal effort or chance of error. Countersinking the screw heads is important so they can be covered over later with thickened epoxy. It also ensures you screw from the correct side when you're trying to work efficiently and beat some curing epoxy. Marking cuts directly from the work does away with some measuring. Because we are working with epoxy, we can stray a bit from traditional timber boat building precision and get away with a marker pen. With the money I saved on timber so far, I was able to invest in some quality Torx head stainless steel screws. They are a real pleasure to use and effortlessly cut into hardwood. With some components of complex shape, I cut them on the router table before applying the glue. This gives me a second chance in case of a screw up and helps with alignment later. Jarrah, while a very durable wood, is quite brittle and demands a mix of standard and climb cutting on the router to avoid blowing out. Having the construction jig prepared early, as suggested by the designer John Welsford, provides a lot of space to work on the frames. A light dusting before gluing keeps things tidy. Not every hole is screwed until the glue goes on, just enough for aligning the parts. Once I have spread a likely amount of thickened epoxy, I like to use a vinyl glue tooth scraper to spread it. The grooves it leaves allows the glue to expand without squeezing so much out of the sides and makes the layer very uniform in thickness. Realignment is pretty quick and done with hand tools, though I do like the speed and uniform torque of power tools to wrap things up. As mentioned in earlier episodes, builder's plastic prevents epoxy from gluing the parts to the support bench. Using screws instead of clamps may not be for everyone, but it does allow access to both sides with very little clutter and very even pressure on the glued components. Here you can see the grooves left in some cured epoxy on this frame I left till after gluing to trim to size. This jarrah did suffer some minor tear out, but that won't matter when it's glued to the hull. The floor stringer rebates look quite clean and perfectly aligned, with any glue squeezed out, trimmed away. Okay, so they're exactly in line, just as we expected with a flush trimming bit on the router. And also, more importantly, these little, the drainage holes and everything, they're trimmed exactly. So it just took a lot of the working out. It was just a very simple thing to glue it approximately, zap them off with the router. So got a nice result, saved myself a little bit of work. So that's pretty much how we'll do the rest of the frames. Another way to remove lumps of epoxy covering screw holes without a router jig or in places that won't fit is with a multi-tool and a flush cut blade. It's a bit slower and prone to marring the surface, but it's still effective. So I'm fairly happy with that, just to demonstrate that. Oh, I've missed a bit up there. So what I will be doing is giving this a couple more coats of epoxy anyway. So any of this where I've got a bit thin and close to the wood, it will cover that up. So that's a nice thing. These multi-tools are really great with fiberglass work. Those things are really good for trimming fiberglass, things like that. And there is lots of other fittings that go on them. So apart from my router, we'll probably be seeing a little bit more of one of these multi-tools. They're so cheap, and for what they can do, I've really come converted to these things. When I first saw them, I thought they were kind of, you know, what good are they? But I've changed my tune. I really like them now. Okay, so these have come up really, really great. I haven't coated this side, but I did coat the wood here. The reason being is there was a bit of squeeze out of thickened epoxy, and because I was able to use a brush and coat these with the wetted out epoxy, I was able to just to clean up any squeeze out and just incorporate it in. Saves me a sanding job. Again, these are going to be under the floor, not this part. This is all going to be under the floor, so it doesn't really matter the aesthetics, but we might as well just, as we go along, just try and keep things as neat and orderly as possible, and just try and work to a high standard in all areas, whether they're going to be seen or not. Because usually I've found that even if you try and do your best, the least you're going to get is good enough. Whereas if you try for good enough, who knows where you're going to end up. Well, thank you for joining us once again for another Boat Build update. If you want to catch each one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the wee bell for a notification. We are entirely viewer supported, so thank you to everyone who makes it possible through contributions to bring you these weekly episodes. See you next time.